The rise of the QAnon conspiracy theory, which first started coming to the attention of the American public in 2017, might at first have seemed to many observers like a kooky, hopefully short-lived fad. But others who knew their history feared that QAnon, which argues the existence of a cabal of Democrats and Hollywood elites engaging in child trafficking, was perhaps a potentially much more dangerous new wave of the sort of satanic panic that had taken hold of the culture in the 80s and into the 90s. And, sure enough, since QAnon became a household word, there's been plenty of evidence of such a resurgence. 2 states, Iowa and Arizona, moved to make the clearly unconstitutional move to ban public satanic displays, with a failed former Republican state House candidate named Michael Cassidy even beheading a legally placed, holiday-adorned statue of Baphomet the local satanic temple had festively placed at the state capitol. While Cassidy faced possible hate crime charges for the act, he was publicly praised by many supporters, many of whom were probably also among the large numbers of allegedly concerned citizens who took to the internet on February 6, 2023, to condemn the performance of musicians Sam Smith and Kim Petras at the previous night's Grammy ceremony, where the duo also won Best Pop Performance. Their live performance of their hit song Unholy, which saw the duo surrounded by flames, bathed in red light, and Smith wearing a hat with devil horns, was clearly meant to play with religious iconography. But no humor was found by the thousands who took to Twitter to complain about the satanic imagery, including noted Republicans Ted Cruz and Marjorie Taylor Greene, who labeled the performance evil and demonic. That Smith is non-binary and Petras is a trans woman was undeniably a factor in these reactions, as many have observed that performers in the LGBTQ+ community are more heavily bearing the brunt of this modern wave of satanic panic, much as heavy metal artists had been the main target in the 80s. Now, Lil Nas X found himself under fire, no pun intended, for a cheeky music video which saw him pole dancing in hell and giving Satan a lap dance. And when Demi Lovato released their album Holy Fuck, with cover art depicting Lovato tied up bondage style atop a plush crucifix, posters advertising the album were banned in the UK. Even if the targets had changed, and the movement now clearly had a depressingly clear anti-queer bent to it, it still definitely was reminiscent of the same satanic panic-fueled hysteria that, in the 80s, saw Tipper Gore and fellow conservatives in a committee known as the Parents Music Resource Center to go after heavy metal artists such as Ozzy Osbourne, King Diamond, Judas Priest, and Twisted Sister, amongst others, coming up with a list dubbed the Filthy 15, 15 songs they believed were socially dangerous due to allusions to sex, drugs, or the occult, and then use that list to pursue new, governmentally mandated monitoring and ratings for commercially released music. It was just one part of the large-scale satanic panic of the 80s, which also saw TV, movies, video games, and even role-playing games such as Dungeons & Dragons criticized for allegedly influencing children towards Satanism. And clearly, as evidenced by the recent wave of new conspiracy theory-fueled satanic panic, these fears have never truly left the ultra-religious, conservative members of society. But just as these fears and misguided public condemnations remain a constant, so too does the response. Today, a spate of new horror movies, such as Immaculate, Late Night with the Devil, and The First Omen, have been produced almost certainly at least partly as a response to the resurgence of satanic panic in our culture, just as the horror genre in the 80s responded with films like The Believers, The Covenant, Trick or Treat, Rock and Roll Nightmare, and Prince of Darkness. It's the ultimate fight fire with fire proposition. If the religious right is going to try to drum up a satanic panic, why not take advantage, exploit their very fears, and make some money? The question is, can you make enough money to justify a sequel? The year is 1982, and Warner Brothers are ready to distribute a new film exploiting modern fears of Satanism and anxiety about emerging home technology, and in the process hopefully launch the next big horror franchise with Evilspeak.
Welcome once again to Failure to Franchise, the show dedicated to some of Hollywood's most infamous mistakes, missteps, and misfires. This is Trev.
And I'm Chris. And I heard that people seek something atop the cathedral peak. Perhaps it's some evil speak.
That's good, man. I like that. That's ultimately better than the tagline that's on the poster for this film. I don't know if you saw that at all in your travels, but before I even say what the name of the movie is, I mean, obviously people have probably seen it in the episode, but the tagline on the poster is, "Remember the little kid you used to pick on? Well, he's a big boy now."
Oh, I don't like that.
I don't like that at all.
I don't like that connotation at all.
But you know what I do like, Chris?
Sure.
I like a new theme.
Love
I
a
like
new theme.
a new theme. I like a new theme month.
Especially when they only last, like you said before, they last 1 month, maybe at most 2 movies.
Yeah, we put so much thought into it, and we a whole month dedicated to 2 movies.
Yeah.
And I also like when we set up a theme, and then we realize later that the theme has a like kind of a technical problem.
Okay, and I will take the blame for this one 1,000%, because when we discuss them, I put them into the app to our shared notes, right? And we agree and everything's fine. And then I swear I checked when Easter lies, and I must have saw April 1st being Easter Monday, and I was like, oh, okay, then it works. And then I thought about it when you texted me, I think yesterday, and you're like, Easter is in March this year, right? And Evil Easter is our theme for April.
Well, I'm not going to get too because to be fair, Easter does usually fall in April. It's pretty common. It's more rare that's in March. And then also when you told me that, I was thinking to myself, like, is Canadian Easter different? Like, I don't even know. Do you guys like celebrate Easter up there? Because like your Holy Trinity is like what, like Wayne Gretzky, Pierre Trudeau, and like Celine Dion or whatever. So I don't know what, like, if you guys even celebrate Easter, or maybe it just comes later. So I'm not going to get too uppy about this, because I think Evil Easter still works. So.
You always show your age with your references to Canadian culture. I'm surprised you didn't say red green today.
I know. I feel like I've played out red green at this point, but
sure.
Don't worry, he'll come back.
Pierre Trudeau is an interesting one. That one you haven't sprung that one on me. Celine Dion, well, one half of the country likes Celine Dion.
Oh, really? Is that like is that like a big divide there?
Well, there's a little bit of a divide because famously Celine Dion is Quebecois, so she's from Quebec, and she used to rally for secession.
Oh, okay.
So I believe that was in like the 90s, but it became a real harsh divide on Celine Dion, depending on if you were on the west side of Canada or the east side. But mostly it was anti-Quebec side.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, there's your history lesson, everybody.
As someone who lives in a country that's like just about to go through a real civil war, so interesting to hear that yours was maybe more based on the woman who sang the Titanic song.
Correct. Yes, that's as far as our controversies go.
Yeah. But we should explain what Evil Easter is as a theme month, and that is, it's as simple as 2 movies with evil in the title. But to push it even further, it's kind of a, we're back in my house now, man. We're back in my territory. It's a month dedicated to horror movies. We're looking at 2 horror movies with evil in the title. Starting. Oh, go ahead.
Well, no. What I was gonna say, what is cool is this one especially, Evilspeak. It's got a big time religious connotation to it. So me, as somebody that was unfamiliar, not to bury the lead or anything, but I was unfamiliar with the property, throwing it in this theme, and me and you just agreeing to it, and then being part of a religious holiday, it kind of worked out for the best, honestly.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I mean, I can't speak for like our listeners in terms of like the whole, Evil Easter thing, where they're like, well, it's not Easter in April. But for me, hey, I ended up watching Evilspeak on Easter weekend for this podcast. So
yes,
it felt pretty appropriate. And that is, so you just mentioned the name, and this, normally I say the year. This one's a little complicated, so I'll just say the 1981/1982 movie, Evilspeak. Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit more about it?
For sure. It is directed by Eric Weston. It's his first feature. It's also written by him and Joseph Garofalo. This was Joseph Garofalo's first feature out of 2 that he wrote. He also produced a 1990 movie, which I'm sure, Trev, you've seen, or at least wanted to see. Flesh Gordon Meets the Cosmic Cheerleaders. Have you seen it?
I haven't seen it, but I mean,
Okay.
I actually honestly hadn't heard of it, but I have heard of Flash Gordon, the original.
Sure.
So I'm guessing this is just a continuation of that franchise because the original Flash Gordon is kind of an infamous sci-fi porn cult classic.
There's a couple
I didn't know about
scenes-
this one.
Well, there's a couple scenes in this movie that I'm certain Joseph Garofalo wrote. The budget of the film, extremely hard to come by. I had to dig into the AFI archives to find the budget for this and the numbers for it. The budget is rough. It's around $3 to $4 million, and it had collected only about $400,000 at the box office because it was only in limited release in Chicago and LA. Now, Trev said it's a weird thing to say at the time. Is it 1981 film or an 82 film? Well, it's because the movie was actually released in Japan first in August of 1981 and then got US distribution in February of 1982. So it's weird because the producers also wanted it to premiere at Cannes, which is hilarious. So it's an odd one to say the least.
Yeah, and I think it's safe to say that 400,000 is not. It's like the entirety of its box office gross because by many accounts this actually ended up being kind of a financial success. And
Correct.
You have to remember these are the days when they would do because you were just talking about that's the limited release of Chicago and L.A. But in '82 you're still talking about a platforming era, especially with smaller films like this where it would probably open in different markets across the country at different times, and you put in like the drive-throughs and everything. And I mean I've heard different numbers, but I've heard up to like its ultimate gross as being in this realm of 10 million, which
Right.
if you're talking about a budget of 3 to 4, obviously, especially back then, is a pretty substantial hit. So
Totally.
and it's and it's a movie that at least in like horror circles, I wouldn't call this one of the most. This isn't one of the biggest horror films of the 80s. I mean, look, it was up against some pretty tough competition. The 80s is a glory period for horror. And I mean, if you're talking about 81, Evilspeak is going to have a hard time, breaking through against The Evil Dead, American Werewolf in London, Scanners, The Howling, Friday the 13th Part 2. And then if it's maybe a little better in 82, because then there's not as many like Stone Cold classics, I'd say, but you still have Poltergeist, The Thing, Creepshow, Halloween 3. So, I mean, this is definitely more of a cult movie that you have to be like a really hardcore horror fan to know. But I'll tell you, for me, what it definitely was, and I'm sure in doing the research, you've seen like the cover and the poster art. This was just kind of like one of those eternal, like, oh, I see that cover at the video store all the time growing up.
Right.
And like it was definitely a video hit, and we're going to talk more about that. At least a video hit in America, where it could be a video hit. So.
I don't know. What do you want to start with? Do you want to talk about Clint Howard a little bit? Do you want to talk about your history with Evilspeak? Like, what do you want?
I mean, my history with Evilspeak actually isn't like that long standing because, like I said, I saw the video in this like store all the time as a kid, but I don't know that I ever rented this. I don't have a memory of seeing this young. I think I came to this much later. But I mean, I'm sure by the time I saw it, I was already kind of, my relationship with Clint Howard was already kind of established. Whereas this is kind of like, this isn't his debut film. When we talk about him, far from his debut, actually.
No.
But it was kind of his first lead role and first especially significant like role in this genre, a genre he's become very known for. But I think by the time I came to it, it was more like I already like Clint Howard for that. So maybe I should check out this one that he's known for when he was younger. So maybe we should talk about like, instead of getting right into Clint Howard, maybe we should talk about the era this came out in and like at least briefly talk about like the whole Satanic Panic idea and how that fed into maybe what they were trying to exploit with this movie.
Sure.
Because obviously one big thing about all these like, small horror films of the early 80s, or at least a lot of them, was they were trying to exploit something. There's something in the zeitgeist. They know where they can make their money. And this would actually speak to two of those things, I'd say. The emergence of the home personal computer and Satanic Panic. And I know this might sound like two odd things to lump together, but once we talk about the movie, that'll make more sense. So, Chris, like, did you, like, before doing the research for this or whatever, how much were you aware of the whole, like, Satanic Panic, of, like, the, like, late 70s, early 80s? I don't know, like, I know it's primarily thought of as an American thing, but I think it was, like, even just, like, North America in general, it was, like, a pretty big deal. So I'm guessing it got up into Canada as well, but...
Very surface level. Like very, very surface level. Yeah, I'm not a history buff on the Satanic Panic. That's for sure.
So yeah, it was like, Satanic Panic, obviously, look, in, especially America, a country like America, which is, built on Puritanism and religion, Satanic Panic has always been around. But when you hear the term Satanic Panic, in particular in regards to like pop culture, we're really talking about an era of the early 80s where it took over pop culture. And kind of two things happened that led to that. There was a publication of a book called Michelle Remembers, which was a book written by a Canadian psychiatrist, thanks guys, Lawrence Pasder, and his patient and future wife, not sure about the ethics of that, Michelle Smith.
That's how we do things up here, baby.
And so this patient, Michelle Smith, allegedly used recovered memory therapy to talk about how when she was a kid, she was involved in all these like satanic rituals. She was abused and put through these satanic rituals by cults. And that book like caught on like wildfire. And then not too long after that, there was a scandal called the McMartin preschool trial, where there was a bunch of allegations against this school and the teachers at this preschool. And these psychiatrists came in and talked to all the kids and were like, well, did they abuse you? Did they abuse you? Were they satanic when they abused you? Did you see pentagrams on the wall? Were these like satanic, rituals? And this again, everyone got really, really scared. It became a big thing. And ultimately it kind of turned out that, well, when you keep asking the kids these questions and you seem to reward them more when they say yes, that's what happens, right?
Yep.
And ultimately, it took a few years, but ultimately the McMartins were found, not guilty of this stuff. But by that time, the damage was done, right? But those two like instances really set afire this wave of satanic panic, primarily in America. And it kind of like just took a hold of pop culture where then, there's all this worry about, oh my God, Satanists. Satanists are among us. They're trying to recruit our kids. They're doing it through horror movies, heavy metal, and Dungeons and Dragons. Even like Dungeons and Dragons became like a real like a bolder, like a really like hot plate button topic in this. And obviously heavy metal, obviously horror films, tons of like books written at the time, tons of movies written at the time exploited this, right? So you just saw a bunch of movies about Satanism because people were scared of it. So you could speak to the people who were scared of it, but you could also like play to the people who knew it was silly by making movies and like kind of like taking the piss on the people who were worried about this, like, these alleged, right, satanic rituals and everything. Yeah.
Well, it's like The Omen and stuff like that, right? Like, was
yeah,
that
that's like a little earlier than that, but like,
Okay.
that doesn't like, like I said, it really caught fire in the early 80s, but I mean, throughout the 60s and 70s, it's already being fueled by films like The Omen, Rosemary's Baby, The Exorcist. The nation was primed for something like this.
The Satanic Panic thing registers for me more, 90s version of it, like the Marilyn Manson of it all and that kind of stuff. That's more or less where I guess have recollection.
It kind of like it still pops up from time to time, right? Like it never completely goes away. Like even in recent years, I mean, like
Taylor Swift.
What's up with this whole thing now at the Kansas City Chiefs that everybody's celebrating some lady, some girl? That if you look at her concerts, man, she does satanic rituals and witchcraft. Why would you want to put that stuff in your home? You talk about blinding yourself again. And then she just happens to be dating Mr. Pfizer, the football player. I mean, you don't think that there's a connection somewhere?
I mean, you can see it in discussion sometimes of like the trans culture. People say there's like Satanism involved in that, or like the other big one is like the Illuminati. People love to talk about the Illuminati as like controlling everything. Yeah, so yeah, it still pops up. You still get these like flares of the the religious right going nuts and claiming that Satanists are running everything. But yeah, like so, Evilspeak was definitely speaking. No pun intended, to that, as well as they said, like the emergence of the home personal computer. We'll talk about that more with the movie itself, but this kind of like emerging technological. In fact, Chris, I want to quickly, if I can get academic for a moment. This is not going to surprise you at all. I have a book called Satanic Panic: Pop Cultural Paranoia in the 1980s.
Okay,
by two Canadian authors, by the way, the great Kiera Janice, who is an amazing like horror academic. She wrote the amazing horror text House of Psychotic Women, and Paul Carup. And this is actually a Canadian publication, but it's a really academic book about Satanic Panic. And I just
don't you love? You asked me my history with Satanic Panic and if it reached up to Canada. And I was like, I don't know, like surface level, like I don't really know much about it. And then you're telling me this book, that book, psychiatrists. Like, we led the charge on theorizing about America.
Yeah. I just wanted to read this a little bit because I thought it was interesting, and it kind of sets up a discussion about this movie's themes.
Sure.
So there's a chapter in here where they're actually talking about Evilspeak and another horror film of the 80s called 976 Evil, which was about demons who come through like phone sex lines, which is a big thing in the 80s as well, right? Those kind of hotlines you would dial.
Right.
And this says 976 Evil and Evilspeak are central film examples of that new 1980s object of knowledge that the Satanic Youth corrupted in the Techno Devil film. The cycle of 80s horror films that place satanic themes in technological environments do not just update Satanism to appeal to a new, technologically mediated audience, but rather demonstrate a basic equivalence between Satanic Panic and 80s technophobia, that new communication networks would fracture family bonds and irrevocably damage North American youth. Both God and the devil live in the computer and telephone line, even if at the time new technology was primarily a metaphor for something yet unable to be understood. So I just thought it was interesting that this movie, like, for what we're going to talk about, obviously, on a lot of levels might just get accused of being like a trashy, low-budget horror exploitation movie, was actually talking to some really prevalent fears of the time.
Totally. Like very, very finger on the pulse stuff, for sure. Mm-hmm. For sure. So
now, I guess we could talk about Clint Howard.
Yes, Clint Howard.
What a segue from Satan to Clint Howard.
Yeah. Started early. Probably about as young as you can be to get into this business. He started at the young age of 2.
Yeah. Coming from a showbiz family, obviously.
Yes, of course. Ron Howard, of course, famous Ron Howard, is his older brother.
Yeah, and his dad is the character actor Rance Howard, and his mom was Jean Spiegel, who was also an actress. So.
Right. Was Ron Howard only in Andy Griffith's show before Clint joined in on that? Were the parents in that show?
I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Rance or Gene guest starred on the Andy Griffith show, but I think obviously Ron being a regular on it was probably what got Clint involved.
I figured you'd know because they would have asked you on set to watch their kids, so I just wanted to make sure.
I did see. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I definitely watched reruns of the Andy Griffith show when I was younger because we were in the 80s. TV was still heavily populated by the classic sitcoms of the previous decade. So it's definitely a show I was familiar with when I was younger. Yeah,
there was a Canadian channel for retro stuff. They called it Deja Vu. That's what it was.
That's not
and
bad.
And I used to watch a lot of Three's Company. Mm-hmm. That's where I started. No, Lost in Space I was watching on Space the Imagination Station, which I've mentioned many times on this podcast. But Three's Company I used to watch on Deja Vu. Bewitched, for sure. All in the Family, I caught a little bit of that when that was on. Mm-hmm. But yeah, no. I'm Andy Griffith, I only know the theme song. I know the whistle theme song.
Yeah, and you're probably vaguely familiar with the whole Don Knotts shtick, probably, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah,
totally.
Yeah,
but Clint began there, so he did a few episodes of that where he played a toddler in a cowboy outfit, just coming around and offering people to bite a sandwich. He was just kind of one of these ongoing bits for a few episodes.
Yep.
He went on to star in a few other things as young kids, but then his first prominent role was in 1967 to 69, Gentle Ben. I have no knowledge of this at all. But
I just know I know this one through pop culture osmosis. Again, I think it was you'd hear it referenced in by comedians and stuff when I was younger. Just a TV show about a boy who's friends with a bear. And to be fair, you're right that's his first prominent role because he was a regular on that show. Mm-hmm. But Chris, we can't overlook.
I know.
One of his first very iconic roles was, of course, in the season 1 episode of Star Trek, the original series, where he played Baylock, the alien who looks like a child but has the mind of a man in the classic episode Corbomite Maneuver.
Some may say a child that looks like an alien.
Well, some might say that. This, of course, set off a long, long history of Clint Howard being involved in Star Trek. He would go on to appear in multiple Star Trek shows. I'm not going to run through them because I don't want you to have to keep putting in every theme. But
honestly, I wouldn't.
Okay, but I definitely wanted to mention Baylock and the Corvette Maneuver because it's a great episode, and it's, even though he's like dubbed in it, obviously, because he was just a small child and they have like an adult dubbing him, but it's still super, super memorable.
Oh yeah, a lot of Star Trek shows, so much so that even he started the newest one, Strange New Worlds. He was in that too, and I guess right after that you had met him at a convention, so that's kind of cool too.
I'll talk more about that in a little bit, but
sure.
And I think it's almost like a rite of passage for Star Trek shows now because he was also on Discovery. So I think at this point they kind of just think it's like a neat little Easter egg to throw him in. Like I know they're working on a new Star Trek show now, Starfleet Academy. They'll probably find a way to get him in there. So.
Oh yeah. Well, he's kind of the guy that pops up in things. Like,
well, that's what we're gonna say, right? So we're talking about his childhood stuff, but like if we can just zoom forward now, this is all setting up an amazingly prolific, long-running career now.
Yes.
Like, this is the guy, like, everybody knows Clint Howard for two reasons. One, his face. Let's just say it. Like, he's a very unique-looking person, and he's very aware of that. He talks about how he realized early on that because of his look, he knew he would never be, like, the leading man. He has been in horror films and stuff, but he knew he was never going to, as I've seen him say, he knew he wasn't going to be Kurt Russell or Robert Redford.
Sure.
So he said, like, what I could be, though, is I could be, like, one of the greatest character actors. And that's what he leaned into. And so I said, like, the one reason everyone knows him is because of his face. And the other is because he is in like 3,000 different things. He just pops up in everything. I mean, obviously he always has like a small role in almost all of his brother's movies, anything Ron Howard directs. But even just beyond that, he pops up in all the Austin Powers movies.
Colonel, you better take a look at this radar.
What is it, son?
I don't know, sir. But it looks like a giant dick.
Yeah. Take a look out of starboard.
Still shows up in a lot of TV shows like Seinfeld and Arrested Development, Married with Children, and just if you're watching a movie that was made, and especially in the last 3 decades, I'd say there's a 15% chance Clint Howard's going to pop up in it.
Yeah, and like he's an actor. He's a dependable character actor.
Yeah,
I think because of his interesting look. That's what is the most memorable thing about him. He pops up and you're like, oh yeah, that's that guy. And then he is just, he's gained a name for himself. Ron Howard went to directorial acclaim, in his career. Shared the wealth with his brother, giving him roles and all this stuff. But Clint really carved out a name for himself, which is cool, which is I like to see.
Yeah, I don't think there's not too many people that you meet that are like, I hate Clint Howard, or I don't like seeing Clint Howard in something. Like,
totally.
Because he's got just a unique energy that anytime he pops up in something, like I said, it happens often, but you're kind of like, oh, good. You feel like you're in good hands suddenly because it's like he's always fun. He's just got this like really unique energy, and he's always additive to whatever he's in. Mm-hmm. He doesn't like subtract from it. It's always like you're kind of excited that here's the Clint Howard scene. I mean, this isn't the first Clint Howard movie we've done, in fact, and it won't be the last one either. He's popped up in Solo, Cat in the Hat, Rocketeer, and there's going to be other movies that we're going to do that he's in. But this is, like we said, this was his first starring role, and so that's why we're spending so much time talking about him. But
you just described him as box office poison, so that's good.
Well, when you're in everything, I mean, it stands to reason.
That's a good point. Yeah,
because he's also in a lot of huge hits. His scene in the first Austin Powers is one of the funniest bits. And so,
his ongoing scene, like
that's what I was gonna say. So it's not surprising that they keep bringing him back. Yeah, and even there, I think he's like parodying his role in like Apollo 13. He's appeared in like numerous like really popular movies or successful movies like Backdraft and Cinderella Man. Frost Nixon. So he's in like a lot of like really successful stuff, but obviously he's also in a lot of movies. He's also in Uwe Boll movies. The guy likes to work. I think that's what we're basically saying. He's
been married 3 times, so he's he needs to pay.
Yeah,
he needs some steady income.
Yeah. But I think we already kind of alluded to it, but what I was going to ask you is like, not as something as basic as are you a Clint Howard fan, but do you kind of agree with me that you're always like happy to see him in something?
Oh, for sure. Like you said, I think the best way that you said it was he's always additive to the movie. I think that's great. You're never disappointed in seeing him. You're just like, no. You're a little, it gives you a little pep in your step when you're watching the movie. For sure. I agree.
And if you are a Clint Howard fan, as me and my fiance are, and that's why we did meet him at that convention. It was a horror convention here in Michigan last year. the other significant thing about Evilspeak is it does begin a very he's got a prolific career in general, but very, very prolific in the horror genre. Mm-hmm. And I think it's because, as I said, he realized early on again that because of the way he looks, it's a more unique look that he just fits really well into the horror genre. He does get cast to play a lot of weirdos and psychos. And he just leans into it with a lot of enthusiasm, and he's really become. I still associate him mostly with horror, probably because I associate him mostly with movies like Ice Cream Man, which is a favorite of mine, especially a favorite of my fiance.
Hey, little boy, you want some free ice cream? Hey! You little turds are gonna have to learn you can't run from the Ice Cream Man.
And then when we met him, we had him sign an Ice Cream Man picture. That's maybe his most iconic starring role in the horror genre now. But Evilspeak starts it all.
Yeah, I understand why he's so into the horror realm, right? Especially when you endorse Ted Cruz for president.
That's the other interesting thing about him. Obviously, when I met him, I decided not to talk politics because I'm aware that unlike his brother, Ron Howard is obviously a very, very well noted Democrat. Interestingly enough, Clint is a Republican and is on the entirely opposite political spectrum than his brother, which I think is it doesn't often happen, but sometimes it does, and I think that's interesting. And it certainly hasn't put a crimp in their relationship. They still work together all the time, but I just think that's kind of interesting that happened.
Yeah. Did you know about his band? It's funny because his band kind of came on the scene right around this film, which is funny. In 1981,
I know of it, but I haven't heard it or anything. But.
Yeah, well, it's because what do you do? The Kempsters, because him and some neighborhood friends when they grew up made it. And it retired 2 years later, and they never released any albums anyways. And then I think he released a CD with some of the songs on it. Have you ever heard the music from him?
No, I haven't. No.
Okay. All right. Yeah. All right, well. A non-starter. Great, thanks.
I see, and speaking. Sorry, but I was just going to say, I was scrolling through his filmography, which I've been doing for the past 3 hours, still not to the bottom. But I see that he is in one of a movie. He's in a movie we just talked about recently. He's in Carnosaur, the movie that terrified young Chris.
Oh, no shit. Okay.
Yeah.
And it wasn't the dinosaurs that scared me. It's weird.
Yeah. Okay, no, he played the dinosaur. He plays all the dinosaurs. That's interesting.
Yeah. No prosthetics. Okay. All right, respectfully. We don't like making fun of actors.
No,
especially Clint Howard.
Yeah, I would never dream of making fun of Clint Howard.
No. Okay, Evilspeak. It doesn't have much for production-wise. I think Trev kind of nailed it by saying it's kind of like it was speaking to the times, right? The Satanic Panic and then also the computer panic. It was in a transitionary time in our world, moving from the 70s to the 80s, and things are getting a little bit more technological. And then, like you said, the culty stuff is going on. So this was kind of, meeting at the crux of that. Mm-hmm. So, no shit, they wanted to make this movie. I found it interesting that there was a lot of health concerns when they made the movie. There was a SAG strike going on, actually, at the time, and they got one of those interim agreements to work, and then they had to work within a warehouse in California, and then all these cast members, all the crew had to wear gas masks, and it was all hazardous. Not a good time to be... it's something that I don't think a lot of people talk about when it comes to movie making. They set a lot of things on fire in this movie, and nobody thinks about the repercussions of that.
Yeah.
About what is exactly burning. And I think in the 70s and 80s and even into the 90s, it's a little bit less regulated than it is today, and that is a big problem. So a lot of these actors and crew members were actually put in harm's way for what? People would ask. So it's just an interesting time. Weird time.
And I never forget, for about 3 weeks, I was just pulling big black boogers out of my nose.
Wait, what? Why?
Because back in those days, they didn't have nearly the regulations they have now about smoke on a set. And the way they make really good smoke is rubber cement. I don't think anybody in the world would ever want anybody to stand next to burning rubber cement. And for a couple of weeks, I was literally just, I was huffing it in.
Whoa.
There was another thing that's no longer legal because they found it caused cancer, and that was called Fuller's Earth. And Fuller's Earth is a thing that you put it into a sanitary sock, or and you dab it on you, and then you can wet it, and it makes instant mud wherever you put it. Or if you just want dust on somebody, you just put Fuller's Earth on them. And I probably went through 10 or 15 pounds of Fuller's Earth on Evilspeak alone.
Whoa, those are the occupational hazards of acting that they really don't tell you about.
So, I don't know, if I start coughing or something, don't blame me.
I think it's also interesting in terms of like the production that this movie, which takes place, we'll get into the plot in a moment, but it takes place at a military academy that also is kind of, has a church. So there's like religious themes obviously running through too, but they filmed it at an actual academy called St. Anthony's Seminary in Santa Barbara, California. And you might ask, well, why would a St. Anthony's Seminary, why would they let a movie like Evilspeak be filmed there? They just basically lied to them. They gave them like a version of the script that had all of the Satanism stuff taken out of it, which like to me, I want to see that version of the script. Once you've seen the movie, once you hear us talk about it, what could that, it's just
3
a movie.
pages.
This kid is bullied and then nothing happens and the credits come on. But for whatever
Sold.
reason, sold. Yeah, you can film that here. So they basically just showed them a version of the script that didn't have any Satanism. And then the school said, yeah, sure, come film here. And then later on, once the film debuted in theaters, some of like the priests and the clergymen who like worked there went and saw the film and were very dismayed and very embarrassed to realize they had let it be filmed there.
And especially when the late founder and high priest of the Church of Satan, Anton LaVey, came out saying that he loved the movie. So not a good look. Catholicism, not a good look.
No. Not a good look, although to be fair, Anton LaVey, I'm actually a supporter of the Church of Satan in general because, today they do actually a lot of great charity work, and they basically what they really promote, their central tenet is just, you should just believe what you want to believe, right, and do what you want as long as it's not hurting anybody. But Anton LaVey, the founder, a very, very silly man. I think if you look him up, he looks like Ming the Merciless from Flash Gordon, and he really leaned into the, I am the Satan, high, and it's just okay, dude, but, it's funny. You definitely, if you make a movie like Evilspeak, you definitely want Anton LaVey to have a pull quote on your poster, but it's not it's fun. I guess the point I'm trying to make is some religious people might say that's like having Satan himself promote the film, and if you really know Anton LaVey, it's more like having this silly man promote it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Do you want to start talking about it now?
Yeah, let's just get into it. We can talk about more of the what the movie is as we discuss the film.
Everyone's known a boy like Stanley Coopersmith. Evilspeak. He's the kid everyone used to pick on.
Screwed up for the last time, Cooper Dick.
Evilspeak. You see, everyone thought Stanley was a joke. An outcast with no one to turn to.
You guys broke my catapult. You're gonna pay for that.
No one except man's most advanced machine. Stanley used the power of man to call on the powers of evil.
I, Stanley Coopersmith, command you! Oh my God.
And all hell broke loose.
Imbue these creatures with your strength and force. Let them avenge me.
Evilspeak. Remember that little kid you used to pick on? Well, he's a big boy now.
Orphan Stanley Coopersmith is a clumsy outcast in the West Andover Military Academy. He is frequently abused and humiliated by his teachers, the local reverend, the colonel, his soccer coach, and a group of jocks. But when Coopersmith finds a black mass book that once belonged to the medieval Father Esteban, he uses a computer to conjure Satan and take revenge on all who torment him.
Yeah, pretty simple, as a lot of these, types of horror movies are.
Oh, yeah.
Chris, I'll go first on this one because for me this was not a first time watch. Obviously, like I said, I came to this movie a little later, but it's definitely something I have seen before, and this is kind of a revisit. And you even said that when I told you about this movie and added it to the list, you had just never heard of this one. This was something that was like entirely sprung on you, and kind of a very like blind spot going in. I know.
Yeah.
So I want to feed that into what I have to say about it because there are certain types of movies we do occasionally on this podcast. Godzilla '98 being a recent example, where because of our ages, I go in thinking, man, I know I hate this movie, but I think Chris is going to pull some, like, I saw this when I was a kid and I think it's good kind of movies. And there's just like, I go in knowing like, I bet Chris is going to like defend this. Sure. And I think this, I don't know yet. I'm eager to hear what you have to say about it. But I feel like this is like the opposite of that, to where I have a feeling, because this is kind of a goofy, cheesy, low budget horror film from the 80s. I have a feeling I probably like this quite a bit more than you do, and you're going to find me on the end of like defending it for like a lot of those elements. Because I think this is a very fun cult movie. As I said earlier, I don't think it can break through to be considered one of the greats of 80s horror by any means, and I think there's a reason it's not at that level. It's not considered that level, and it has more of a cult following. But I think for, some of the smaller like B-level horror movies of the 80s, I think this is like a really, really fun one. And in fact, I find it kind of more and more fun the more and more I revisit it. I'll admit it gets a little sluggish in the middle, but you and I often talk about how it's, especially for these kind of movies, you want to go out hot. You want to end
Literally.
strong. Yeah. Yeah. I think as long as a movie like this ends strong, the audience is very, very forgiving of a lot of what comes before. And I think you would at least agree, we'll obviously talk about it, but this movie ends pretty strong for what the audience probably wants to see coming in. I think this movie has a lot of great practical effects work, a lot of cool gore, and I do think Clint Howard's performance is so just unique. Like I said, he just has a really unique screen presence. This movie might not work if it's not Clint Howard. I think Clint Howard is actually what keeps it watchable all the way through. And then you get rewarded with a couple insane sequences throughout, but an absolutely balls out insane finale. So, I mean, like, it's not like one of my favorite films. I'm not here to say it's an A+ or anything, but this is a movie I quite enjoy, and I would consider myself a part of the cult of Evilspeak, but not in a satanic way.
Nice. So the movie, funnily enough, the movie I watched the day before I watched this one was Immaculate.
Yes,
the brand new
which I've
2020.
Still not seen, but I'm looking forward to.
For sure, and I'm not going to spoil it here, but suffice to say, it is a religious horror film that takes place in Italy. Not that this movie takes place in Italy, but the beginning does. The beginning takes off on the shores of Italy, in this like prologue thing. But Immaculate, is a movie where they got clearance from real churches, and it takes place in cellars, and it's got that old school religious horror vibe, right? I'll tell you, I was pretty primed for this, so I'm gonna surprise you and say that I liked it as well. I'm not,
okay, great. Cool.
I don't think it's like amazing.
No,
and I agree that it gets very sluggish in the middle. And I have some other problems that I want to talk about, but by the time you get to the end, it fulfills the promise of a satanic revenge flick.
Yes.
So because it's bleak and satisfying, it's ultimately a win in my book. Again, I don't love it, but I think it's worth the sluggish middle to get to that end. I'm also a huge, I mean, you are too. I mean, everybody is, but we're both huge Carrie fans. So I think this is like, oddly enough, the gender swapped version of Carrie in a lot of ways. Computer Carrie as well. And I think that's what's fun. And one thing I really liked, I said earlier that there was like this transitionary period between the 70s and 80s. And I think this movie really captures that. It's got that tangible squirreliness of the 70s. The zooms aren't perfect. When you zoom in, and it's kind of like it's going as fast as like the camera operator can do it, so he has to take a break. I love that. The handheld camera, the different film stock quality, very much so, the shoddy edit points, and also boobs within the first 4 minutes. So it's got that vibe, but then also mixes in that technological threat and fear of computers in the 80s. So when you said it was the crux of two eras kind of meeting, I really felt that, and I liked it for that. I also like when things take place in real fucking locations and sets. So having it in a real church and real cellars and real buildings, I know that's not a lot to ask for, but in this day and age, it is a welcome thing,
Yeah, for sure. And I think, and then you talked about like the boobs in the first like 4 minutes and more boobs later, and like also a decapitation in the first 4 minutes. Like basically like boobs, decapitation right in a row, This movie's giving you all the hits early on, I tell you. It's like almost like, here, let's get this out of the way so that you can kind of like settle in for like a little bit more of a sluggish, middle. But one thing you hit on is that even during the sluggish middle, I do think this movie is pretty well hitting like the basics of the kind of bullied kid, getting revenge against their bully story. They really do. I think you do feel for Cooper Smith in this, because at a certain point, he's clearly in the wrong of what he's doing, like why he gets like so obsessed with this demonic program and still, and he kind of instantly, it's kind of funny how fast he jumps into going from bullied kid who would like to get some kind of revenge to going like, well, I guess I'll just summon Satan. This is why I say it's important for it to be Clint Howard, because I think Clint Howard actually, I mean this in a nice way. I'm talking about like this is a compliment in this regard. He's so pathetic in this movie. That it works very well. Where you're like, oh, he's so pathetic that I do want to see him finally get some kind of victory, because this movie is like relentless in how much it bullies Stanley Cooper Smith throughout.
Oh yeah, like he's always tripping over, dropping his stuff. He always looks like he's got this confused, sweaty shit in his pants. Like it's just he's constantly
biggest pit stains I've ever seen on a shirt in my life. Like
constantly, he's constantly sweating in this. So I mean, I never was a bully. I don't agree with bullying, but also I get it. I kind of understand that this kid is getting bullied, and the jocks are just so shitty that it really works. And one of the jocks, what's his name again? Don Stark, the actor who goes on to play Donna's father in that 70s show is in this. Very young, by the way. Yeah. It took me a second to compute, but very young. He leads the ragtag jocks to really, really take it to Stanley Cooper Smith. So, and so much too, like I said, the coach doesn't like him. Like nobody likes this guy at all, except for one kid. One kid is like fine with him. It's like maybe
and then later like the cook likes him too.
Yes. Almost, well, the cook kind of takes pity on him. It's very much like you're a loser. Here's a dog. I just wish it was tightened up a bit. Yeah. I think if this movie was 80 minutes long, which is like stretching the feature length mode, I think it would be just fantastic. But I think it just takes too long, and because Stanley is so pathetic, I think you kind of get exhausted by watching him be so pathetic.
Yeah, I think that's what I was kind of getting at, is like the end really works, and the movie largely works because he's so pathetic. So you are waiting for that final, when the turn finally comes and he gets his revenge.
Yeah, you're just get it over with.
It is so relentless against Cooper Smith that it does hit a point where you're just kind of like, whew, okay, I don't know if I can watch this kid get bullied much longer. You do hit that point for sure. And I agree, like even just taking out something as simple as 10 minutes would tighten this up and make it a real banger. Yeah. But I mentioned too, and I'm sure we want to talk about this a little bit, how I tend to like this even more revisiting it now and like, as I get older. And I think that's because, and maybe this is unfair, but movies are a product of their time, and you engage with them as they exist then. As we get further and further away from the era, all the computer stuff becomes sillier and sillier, which I treat as like a benefit to this movie, because now it's very funny to watch it. And like, this whole thing about his Apple II computer being the device which connects him to Satan. I get that the people were still very confused by personal computers at the time, but everything is like, it's like all DOS-based programs now.
Yep.
And, the computer graphics when Satan takes over, or when, Esteban or the demon takes over the computer, very, very silly stuff, but stuff that I quite love. in like it gives the movie a camp value when this isn't a necessarily campy movie. This isn't a movie that's like leaning into or mocking itself. This is playing it pretty serious, but all that computer stuff gives it the camp element, which I don't think distracts from the rest of the movie, but it's just an added joy for people like us who like to kind of laugh at that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I also laughed at the pageant that they have for the military school. They call it Miss Heavy Artillery.
Yeah,
and then it's a bunch of
like them having like a bikini pageant at this.
Yeah, and it's like a bunch of half-naked 16 and 17-year-olds, which is for them to say it is like, that's Hollywood, baby. Like for them to say the ages, you're sitting there, especially with the guise of 2024. You're like, well, also product of the time, I guess.
Yeah,
but. Yeah, and then there's there's nudity of the secretary that steals Cooper Smith's book and then tries to maybe get this the logo off of it, and then summons these hell hogs, which I like to call them, just pigs that are on the grounds of the academy, just go crazy and go to kill her. That was a pretty brutal scene.
Mm-hmm.
But again, very raw. It's a very raw 70s feel to it. That's what I mean by it. It's obviously not even close to Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but that raw 70s vibe of violence, I think this really shows that off, Well,
one thing you have to say about this movie is that when it comes to the gore and the death scenes, this movie is not playing around.
No.
Now, is all the gore super realistic? No. But is it all, like good practical gore that gorehounds love to see? Yes. I mean, you said that pig scene ends with a shot that is you can kind of recoil from a little bit.
Oh yeah.
It's like, oh man. And then they said that some of the decapitations are really wrong. There's decapitations. They're also just full on head smashes in this movie that look great. Just destroying a head and it blowing up, with striking with this magic sword or whatever. The gore is great in this, and that's why we should put an important caveat on this too. I know that when you first went to watch this, you were going to watch it on Tubi, American Tubi. You were ready to dive into the American side of things for this. The reason I want to bring this up, Chris, is because two things. I want to do a little public service announcement here, and I also think maybe we have two public service announcements to make. One somewhat of an apology. So you contacted me and said, "Hey, be careful because I found out the version on Tubi is censored." And I already was going to watch it on Shudder, which I have the horror streaming service where it's available. But that raised a point that this has come up recently on Twitter and some other social media services, that apparently a lot of movies are censored on Tubi.
Oh, really?
In particular, in the horror genre. And I just want to bring that up as people, and I'm part of this club. I love Tubi, and I know Tubi has become the favorite streaming service of a lot of people who, especially people who miss the old video store days, because Tubi is probably the streaming service that most replicates that, where it's full of some mainstream stuff, but then also full of just total trash that you've never heard of. And you go on there and you can kind of scroll through the covers and find just these weird little gems. But there's a caveat there. It's now owned by Disney, because it was owned by Fox, and it has ads. When you're talking about being owned by a major corporation and having advertising on it, you have to make some concessions. So I just want to throw that public service announcement out there, because people who just go so crazy about Tubi and calling Tubi the savior of the streaming wars and the best. Yeah, but also be careful, because a lot of the movies on there are censored. You might not be seeing the actual version, and Evilspeak is a great example of that. And sorry, I'll go in just one second, but the reason I wanted to bring that up, because here's where I think we might owe an apology, is I know another movie we watched on Tubi was Dragon Wars. So now I'm thinking, we said that movie was really bad, but maybe Tubi just edited out all the good scenes. Maybe we saw an edited version, and that's why it was so bad.
Or they fixed it, and the version that we could have seen, we would have turned down into when you watch The Ring.
Yeah, yeah, maybe, yeah.
Found in closets, all just yeah, it's weird. And then I looked on at YouTube too, and it's cut there on YouTube as well. And for the corporation advertising reason as well. So I ended up watching it on Plex. Every once in a while, I forget that there's Plex. Letterboxd, by the way, listeners, you can go into the podcast app and go find mine and Trev's profiles there. But Letterboxd has this great service, or I guess feature, not service, but feature, where you can see where the movie's playing, and then it gives you like the cheapest way to watch it, the HD version, the SD version, free if it's on streaming service, but it lists everything there by country. So if you're ever wondering where to find something, because we have 500 streaming services, go there. So I found it on Plex for free. I don't even think I had commercials on it, actually. But yeah, 144 minutes, and I got all the gory goodness that Trev, this was banned because of
not
that.
144 minutes. That's over 2 hours.
Sorry?
It's not 144 minutes. That would be over 2 hours.
Oh, yeah, could you imagine? Yeah, okay, I meant 100. Yeah, that's what I meant. Hour 44.
Yeah.
But anyways, this movie was banned in the UK, and for reasons why Trev is going to, give us a lesson on.
Well, no, like I said, like when I talk about this movie, like not playing around with the gore, like one reason that this movie has held on and has like kind of a cult reputation is this movie was one of the video nasties. So if you haven't heard that term before, the video nasties were a group of movies, 72 films that were essentially banned in the UK, as you just mentioned, during the 80s. So when the video boom happened in both America and the UK, it really took off in the UK because in America there was the video boom, but there was also like cable and satellite. So there's a lot of things kind of vying for people's attention. Mm-hmm. But in the UK, they didn't have. It took them longer to get cable and satellite TV. So they still only had the 3 channels or 4 channels at the time, whatever it was. So video really, really took off in the UK. But everything that was shown on UK TV and put in theaters there was supposed to pass, muster, pass censorship by the British Board of Film Classification. I don't know all the specifics of this, and if I was going to get this, like a whole podcast series on this, but there was some kind of loophole that allowed certain videos to bypass that review process. And of course, horror films took great advantage of this. And so a lot of these like really, really like gory horror films of the 70s and 80s started hitting UK shelves, and people lost their minds. And there was a campaign led by this teacher and conservative woman named Mary Whitehouse. And she got the government on her side, and they came up with this list of 72 films that the office believed violated the Obscene Publications Act of 1959. And these were subsequently dubbed the Video Nasties. There was the first list of 72, and then there was an additional 82 titles they threw on later, which they said, well, these ones aren't as bad. These ones couldn't get you convicted for obscenity, but you still shouldn't have them. With the 72 originals, if you were a video store caught selling these tapes, you could be fined or put in jail for violating this Obscene Publications Act. So these became like bootleg items in the UK. There's great documentaries about the video nasties. If anybody is interested in the topic, I would really recommend. There's a recent horror film from the last few years called Censor. That's great. It is a horror movie, but it's about like the main character is one of the censors who works to cut the films down. So yeah, you had to, if you didn't want to be a video nasty and if you wanted to actually have your tape be legal to purchase and view in the UK, you had to allow the BBFC to go in and cut your films down substantially. And I believe I just had it up. Let me see here. When Evilspeak was released in the UK eventually in 1987, after the Video Nasties thing kind of started to die down a little bit, they were still censored. It was released in 1987 in the UK with 3 minutes and 34 seconds cut. Right. It was not released uncut in the UK until 2004. So that's how long it took for a lot of these movies to finally hit the market in their full version in the UK. Now, obviously, by that point people were watching them online and finding their way. Mm-hmm. But it's just kind of crazy to think that there's a lot of look. Have I seen most of the Video Nasties? Of course I have. Especially as a horror kid in the 80s, it was like it became like a rite of passage, and the thing, oh, you want to see the crazy stuff? Watch the Video Nasties. Some of them
find a Video Nasty in the forest, under a big tarp.
Yeah. I mean, some of them, like, honestly, you watch them and you go, like, why was this even on the list? Some of them are, but then some of them were like, oh, yeah, of course, Cannibal Holocaust or Cannibal Ferox and Blood Feast. I get those ones, And then some were just like, really, there's not much that wrong with this. But yeah, Evilspeak made the list, and that gave it some clout to gorehounds. People wanted to see this because they're like, oh man, it must be really gory, and it is. And especially the end. Well, I keep talking about the climax, but that's when I say the climax delivers, you get quite the gore fest in the last like 5 minutes of this movie. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's We got hell hogs. We got beheadings. We got floating Clint Howard. We got a real church fire. We got heart ripping out of chests, a la Temple of Doom. We got bombastic choir in the score. We got very Carrie inspired, but if I remember correctly, Carrie is doing what she's doing, but she's not really happy about doing it. Like there's Sissy Spacek's face is very sympathetic in a lot of ways, I think, like especially at the aftermath that she's like, oh no, what have I done kind of thing, right? But in this way, Stanley Cooper-Smith is floating around with this giant sword, swinging it, and looking fucking nuts, too. The way he's, like, floating around, looking like he's kind of deformed in a weird way. Like, his arms are facing weird, and he's just, it's very off-putting. That's what I'd say. It's off-putting. And it's less, like, it's fun, quote-unquote, but the gore is very well done, that it is, like, oh no.
Well, that's what I think is interesting, because when he first pops up out of the floor in this sequence, so this is his final revenge sequence, and as you said, like, it's Clint Howard with suddenly his hair standing straight up, floating, holding this sword, and your first instinct is to laugh, because let's face it, as you said, it is silly looking.
Yeah.
And then very quickly, it stops being silly, because it's like, oh, I was laughing, I thought this was just going to be goofy. And then it's like, oh no, oh yeah, this is still delivering on the horror, because, but it's also, it's that like only the horror genre can do. And look, we're not here to, be psychologists or whatever, but because of the characters who are getting it, you're kind of rooting it on, you're not feeling too bad to see the bullies get theirs. And it's just, and the movie like pulls no punches in how, like, look, let's face it, these bullies, let's just say it, we haven't even mentioned this yet. The bullies kill a dog earlier in the movie, a puppy.
Which I will say, this is my biggest sticking point with the movie. I, for obvious reasons, of course, I don't like that. Okay?
Yeah.
But I think it's the viciousness that it happens, and even prior, leading up to it, the way that the actors are handling the puppy is like borderline abuse. And there's this moment where the janitor finds the dog, and Stanley's hidden the dog in this like cellar area where he's been doing all this conjuring, right? And he hides it, and then the caretaker comes in and is all mad. He's a drunkard, right? Like he's just a real pissy guy. And then he finds the dog, and he grabs the dog so violently, and he like goes to break its neck, and it's a real dog the guy's holding, and it's like, oh my god, like you do take a moment where you're like, oh my god, he's gonna snap that dog's neck. And I did not like that, and I just felt it was unnecessary, because we hated these bullies already, and we saw it was so relentless, the bullying, that it was like enough. I didn't need to see them break into his cellar when Stanley's not around, find the dog as well, and realize, and I understand like the demon's trying to like tell them to do it. I get that. It's not really of their own volition, but it kind of is. And I have no sense that these bullies would kill a puppy. And then when they do it, I guess I just didn't need it to happen. And I know the obvious comparison people will say to me is like, well, what about John Wick? Oh, John Wick. Oh, yeah. It's a revenge movie that spawned a huge franchise because they killed a dog. And I'd say that the dog was always a placeholder for something more thematic. The dog is his wife. It's his last bit of his wife. It's the last bit of his life outside of this, and they have ripped it away from him. So on a thematic level, it works. On this, it's just angry and mean, and it's just a little bit abusive. So much so that Clint Howard is on record being slightly traumatized by the experience of like holding, a quote-unquote dead dog and crying in the cellar and watching the scene.
Clint, they killed your puppy.
Fred, we're a team. We're a team, Fred.
Isn't there some unwritten rule in the movies that you don't kill dogs?
I don't think so. Didn't they kill Old Yeller? They didn't gut him like a fish. They gutted Fred like a fish. Of course I'm gonna get possessed and kill all the motherfuckers. They killed Fred. I'll tell you what, Joe Bob, that was a scene I did not have to rehearse.
Really?
In fact, and I'm not going to allow myself to do it here, but I could cry right now thinking about Fred.
Really?
Yeah. And in fact, sometimes, listen, I always try to be organic with emotion. There's a couple of instances in my life where I have been in a scene that has drawn so much emotion organically that I have used it later on in my career. There's been times in my career as an adult, if I've needed to cry and I'm not quite feeling it, I'll think about that scene from Evilspeak. The little dog didn't deserve it.
And I think after all these years, I think that's very telling. I don't know. I would say I was into this movie, but when they did that, the whole time I'm like, they're gonna kill this puppy, aren't they? And then when they do it, I was just like, aw, they didn't have to do it. They didn't have to be manipulative with me. It was enough. Would you agree?
I get where you're coming from. I would never tell you you're wrong on that opinion, and I won't argue it. I would only say here's where I feel differently, and here's where I agree. I also really don't like watching the dog get kind of manhandled by some of the actors, because I think you're right. Like it's both. The guy playing Sarge, the drunk you're talking about. First of all, that's R.G. Armstrong, and like a really, really famous, really like a great character actor. Been a bunch of Peck and Paw stuff, and just had an amazing, incredible career. But yeah, watching him like actually grab that dog very viciously, and then later the guy from that '70s show, and the way he's kind of tossing the dog around, didn't love it. In terms of, like you said, it's just really, really mean. I mean, I kind of agree, but at the same time, there is like a mean streak to these movies of this time period,
sure.
This genre that I kind of like. I think that's kind of the point, and I do think maybe the movie doesn't narratively and thematically play it off as well as John Wick, because let's face it, I mean, I like this movie, but it's not made with the skill of John Wick.
Yeah.
But it is playing that the death of the dog is like the final straw for Stanley, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is the last thing that pushes him to like, okay, now I'm really just like leaning all into letting this demon take me over and take these kids out. And the other thing I'd say about it is that, you never like seeing a puppy die and get killed in a movie, obviously, but the real puppy wasn't, I'm sure, but even thematically, but it does lead to like kind of a funny joke in a little bit. Like that's the thing too, is that you say it's like not adding anything, but there is like, and this speaks to the kind of the humor of the way demons will mess with people. Where leading up to the death of the dog, the whole time, like this, for like, multiple scenes, the computer has been saying like what is needed for this like ritual, right? Mm-hmm. And it keeps saying blood, blood, blood. And so the kids see that and they're like, oh, this thing requires blood. And I do think on a sick, that's the way demons mess with humans level, it's kind of funny that they kill the puppy, and the moment they do, it goes human blood. Yeah. Like it's that's a detail you could have told us a little earlier. So yeah, it doesn't bother me the way it bothers you in terms of the story, but I definitely agree that those actors needed some lessons on how to handle that puppy.
Oh my god, I know, and I think that's what maybe got me the most. Like, I can make the connection that yes, of course they kill the puppy, and then Stanley's like, well, I got to burn the church down now, and I'm like, yeah, okay, you know what, I'm in, right? But It's the leading up that was like, there was just no handlers on this production. There was no, I mean, I didn't look at the credits, but I would be surprised if there was a no animals were harmed in the making of this movie thing. And if it was, they lied, because I saw it.
I mean, it's kind of like you think about like, why did they have that scene? Why did they resort to like, well, let's do the easy thing of killing the puppy? And I think it kind of is that if you're the writer, Weston and Garofalo, and you're thinking, well, what is the final inciting incident for Stanley? What is going to be the thing that pushes him over? You mentioned that he only has two people that care about him in this movie. He has the one student who's kind of friendly with him, and then the cook who takes pity on him. And it's probably a step too far to have the bullies do anything to those people, right?
Sure.
You're not going to have the bullies like kill another student or kill the school cook. So the puppy becomes this like innocent, symbol of like, oh, well, what shitty kids do abuse animals. That happens.
Yeah, definitely.
And I can believe that bullies would kill a puppy. I will agree with you that how bloodthirsty all four of them suddenly get is a little extreme, and you almost have to, like, I guess the
girls don't stop them either. Like, the girls are around them too. That these other ones that aren't really affected by the demon stuff that's going on, they just kind of let it happen.
The girls
too.
aren't. With the bullies, I'd say at least you could make the excuse that they are being taken over by some level of the demonic force at that point, right? But the girls are just kind of like, oh, okay.
So regardless, though, it does lead to that ending. So, like, the ending is, like I said, it fulfills the promise of a satanic revenge flick. So in that case, it is a success overall.
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned the gore. We should also, because you talked about like the love of like practical sets and everything, and like we also get some awesome production value here. When the church starts going and blowing up, it looks pretty amazing. I guess that's because they burned down an actual church.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if we talk about how like this film was largely filmed at the St. Anthony's Seminary, but for this like climactic scene, they were actually able to find a church that was about to be demolished, and they were able to utilize that.
Most people who see this movie don't realize that you really did destroy a real church.
It was sort of sad. We were shooting where the 105 freeway was going to get built through central Los Angeles. It wasn't a great part of town. In fact, our security guards that day had shotguns.
Whoa.
We worked 2 days down at this church. And this church was condemned and was going to be torn down. And the producers found out about it, and they said, wait, before you tear it down, can we burn it? So they went in there and fixed it up to make it look pretty good. Now, it was all show business fixing up. Nothing was real, but they made it look good. Well, the old minister who had been there for years and years and years at this church, he came by and saw the building. He dropped down on his knees and he said, praise the Lord, my church has been repaired. And there's an old black guy. Nobody had the heart to tell him, well, yeah, we repaired it. We're going to burn it down tomorrow night.
Oh, no, that poor guy.
It looks dangerous as well. It really looks dangerous. Back to what we were talking about, like the fumes everybody's inhaling. It looks dangerous.
Yeah. You can't win this movie. You can either go on set and inhale those like fake fumes, or you could show up to the day they burn down the real church and probably like there's this just sending asbestos into the air.
And then we get a tag at the end of the movie that says Stanley Cooper Smith is the sole survivor of this accident, and that he's admitted to this insane asylum where he remains there still. And then it says something, and then it goes, Stanley Cooper Smith will return. And it's a bleak ending, and something like this works in that respect. And man, like I would like to see more of this. I don't know if I need to see Stanley Cooper Smith return. I like the idea of Father Esteban and the demon return, and then just kind of Evilspeak, the franchise, goes across with people discovering new forms of tech. You know what I mean? Like they're using their new computer, or they find a book and it's a new like a Palm Pilot. and that sort of thing I like. I think this is rife for a reboot, I would say. Don't you think this works so well within what we do now with movies that this is just do it again?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also like it's either a reboot, or I think this actually could be ripe for a legacy sequel.
Or that too, yeah, for sure.
So throughout this episode, we've been playing clips of Clint Howard talking about his experience in this movie. Those all come from an interview he did with Joe Bob Briggs on The Last Drive-In, Joe Bob's Shudder series, which featured this film a few years ago. And I know on there he was asked about why the sequel never happened.
Clint, I have never seen a more obvious setup for a sequel. The movie made $10 million on an investment of $1 million. What happened?
The rights of the movie, from my understanding that I developed with Eric, I mean, because I think he tried a little bit, is the rights got tied up. The ownership of the movie got tied up. So when you make a movie, you have to own it. And Silvio Tabet was, I think, Syrian. And he sold it over in the Middle East. And so the question, Lebanese, I think Silvio was Lebanese. But the question of ownership became a thing. And, a bank can't fund a movie that they can't guarantee it's theirs. Eric and I years ago talked about trying to figure out a way to do it, update it. We'd have to have a new Stanley Cooper Smith, and I could play my age and play myself. That's one thing I feel like in horror movies. I could be Stanley Cooper Smith as a 55-year-old guy, you know. But to be the center of a horror movie at 55, I just think is not good.
And as we heard him say there, you know, like the sequel, they tried to get it going, you know, probably shortly after, couldn't. And I don't know if I don't know that I agree with him that he couldn't still star in it. I think the Legacy sequel route would be kind of interesting to have the movie start with an old Stanley Cooper Smith finally released from the institution, you know,
right,
and like kind of return to the scene and maybe find like the old computer like in the wreckage and pull it out. And what I think you could do is you could do the typical Legacy sequel thing where if you don't want old ass Clint Howard to be like the main, you know, demonic force of the movie, he could still be there and set it in motion, but he could find like a young protege, right?
Yeah, the Stranger Things kid.
Yeah, he finds a kid who he sees another kid getting bullied, right? And he's like, oh, you know, I can help you with that. And then he introduces him to the Father Esteban thing. So I think you could do that. Now, is this movie popular enough to justify that? Probably not, right?
No,
That's the sad thing is I don't think there's probably enough interest to financially justify a Clint Howard led sequel. But to what you were saying, I do think it has enough, maybe just a little bit enough of a reputation and a good enough hook that you could just do a full on reboot remake and do it with modern tech. You know, maybe do it with like VR instead of just, you know, an Apple II or whatever, and like kind of and retell the story.
I was immediately thinking of the Beetlejuice trailer, and then if you just superimpose all of these characters in that trailer, and then they go into the church and they take, you know, the big cloth off the table, and it's like the Esteban's coffin, and then Cooper Smith just comes out of the ground, the same hair.
Yeah. I guess I will say, though, like my only fear with a modern Evilspeak would be that it just wouldn't have the same magic and charm of an early 80s version of it, you know? Like, a lot of what makes this movie work, as you said, is like kind of the charming jankiness of this time period. The practical effects, which probably wouldn't be as practical in a new version. No, definitely. You know, we'd get a lot more CGI. We wouldn't maybe linger on the gore in the same way.
We got CGI fights in Roadhouse.
Yes. If we can't film people punching each other in the face without CGI anymore, then they're not going to put in the work to, you know, explode a head like this movie did the same way. And then honestly, as I said, if you don't have Clint Howard, you know, there's a lot of young actors who I think could play, you know, a bully who, you know, strikes back with demonic forces. But Clint Howard really is adding something special to this movie that would be hard to replicate.
For sure. He plays the ultimate, like, it sounds bad, but he plays the ultimate loser. Like he's really good at playing kind of a dorky loser. And it goes back to even the bits in Austin Powers. You know, he's kind of a dork at the headset, you know? So it works. It works. But are you surprised that I like this as much as I did? I don't love it, but are you surprised that I'm even on the level of positive?
No, I'm pleasantly surprised. Yeah,
nice.
I didn't know if like maybe this one would be like a little too cheesy for you or whatever. But no, it's nice to know that this, you know, like I said, I guess it's a confirmation of what I did kind of suspect, is that when it's impossible to watch the last 10 minutes without a big smile on your face. I think if you're into like horror and practical effects at all, like this movie does just this is a movie that sends you out happy. So
100%.
Yeah.
Well said, and I think that'll do it for Evilspeak 1981/82. Furthering into the void of Evil Easter, we're going to be looking at Evil Dead from 2013, the first attempt at a reboot, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So look forward to that. Follow us at F2FPod. That's at F2, the number 2FPod on all the socials. Like us there, like us everywhere. Rate, review, whatever you do. Throw us a star rating on your podcast app. That'd be great. And just join the tribe and hit that subscribe. Join. You know, I like that we joined the tribe and not the cult. Yeah, maybe I should have changed that for this one, but maybe next time.
Yeah.
But I do. We have a few words before we go out here, Trev. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
You got your book, or you got your MS DOS computer in front of you?
Yeah, let me hold on. Let me load up the. Oh, jeez. Okay, it's gonna take a few minutes for the RAM to get going here, but okay, yeah, I think I'm good.
Okay, great. Okay. By the four beasts before the throne, by the fire which is about the throne, by the most holy and glorious name, Satan, we, Trev and Chris, will return. We will return. How funny if Liz was listening right now, by the way.
She wouldn't bat an eye.